existed.
Welcome once again to the Pierrots and Fools show. Now, this series, the third, comes to you at a time when all that we've talked about and debated and exposed and researched over the last 25 years of the truth movement have landed in reality. Mind, it didn't just begin with 9/11, contrary to what many would have you believe. It's been a permanent feature in history. It's just that the word truth was never assigned to it publicly, I guess, lest you got tortured or suicided or burned at some stake, proverbial or otherwise. I was going to subtitle this episode, The Rape of Albion. We are the buggered. And maybe that is the appropriate subtitle. Or maybe a lubricant for the perplexed, to ease the passage of issues such as what sovereignty actually is, and how it imparts no rights to oligarchs or to freemen, or, come to that, to heterosexuals, or to gay folk, or to male, female, or somewhere in between, other than that which the land itself grants. We might talk about why a poster exposing the legal name fraud, or claiming to, is about as much use to our movement as toilet tissue is to your own. Why exposing the mortgage fraud will be of little help to anyone beyond that which I've highlighted as the only issue I believe we can deal with in reality. Why do the complicated issues of some individuals deflect us from the simple issues? Why, for example, did the Bradbury pound need no whistleblower at all to reveal it? We might talk about what it was and why it's of little consequence in today's financial realities, except to those who are being used by the New World Order or globalist forces, as they perhaps should be more correctly termed now. These people are so often limited to and even amplified by their own inadequacies or their social or personality disorders. I don't exclude myself from it, but I do try to remain conscious of this. I look around and see so many people in our liberty movement who are frozen in their own headlights, preferring perhaps to confuse people for their own propagation by suggesting things such as it's all an illusion, or that the global political reality today is just another pantomime, and that it should be ignored and not engaged. In particular, for example, the USA at the moment and the Donald Trump challenge to the establishment. Yes, it's straight out of a Hollywood drama. But isn't this the drama that you and I sought, but could barely imagine not so long ago in reality? And now that you can see it, you discard it. These real disclosures and the real consequences. You discard them as contrived, and you encourage people to ignore it because you don't actually have a handle on the reality yourself, preferring instead to believe that it's all an illusion designed to fool you, but you know better, you egotistical. But real lives and realities are at play here, and those of the future. This is therefore a distractive mindset to adopt if you claim to be adding to human knowledge and insight, or to truth and reality, rather than to uncertainty and mystification. Some of these folk are the key names in our UK movement, certainly, and one example could be David Icke, but another, in his latest video, has a competition running for listeners to come up with yet another amusing name for our politicians, as if polypedicians wasn't good enough. Amusing though this may be, and fun though it is, I do see a major issue. It's a distraction from a reality which requires engaging, and those who encourage others not to engage it, right at the time when it needs engaging and understanding, are either misled by their own misunderstanding or contrived ego, or are, perhaps innocently, misled by others. And hey-ho, certain folk did exactly the same at the time of Brexit too. Sitting on the same fucking fence, plucking the same fucking splinters out of their arse afterwards. Now, I can't speak for you, but I personally fought at every opportunity to get us out of the EU. I wouldn't have gone in. Not for my personal gain, incidentally. If I'd wanted monetary gain, I could have so taken it. But I wouldn't be here now saying what I mean. And I know that so many others gave a chunk of their lives, a huge chunk in some cases, to this cause. This was a huge and a real issue, and a political one, not a fucking pantomime. So when I hear others eternally spouting their fence-sitting shite and casting off all those lives and that effort as a pantomime, as is being done with the USA now, for example, well, it pisses me off. It's the purest sophistry, telling folk not to bother voting because it's all a sham or a pantomime. Yet, for the first time in our history anyway, we had, in Brexit, a one-man, or woman, vote before us with a real potential outcome. But he or she is not alone. I believe that if it were not for folk like this, the vote for Brexit would have been even more substantial and far more credible. I often wonder when I consider the huge numbers of so-called awake people nowadays, how many of them were afflicted by the meme, unleashed by this intellectual laziness in our own fucking movement. Is it just laziness, or could it be political indoctrination? Yeah, with a view to adding to the general discontent of the population in this system. There are, after all, Chinese and British agents working among us, and they have been since this movement started. China, or one of its agents, David Lee, was responsible for unleashing the Gaussian copula formula, which brought our markets down in 2008. It was an act of planned intent. He then went back to China to run their financial system, to this day, I believe. It was in the year prior to this, after my wife and I had separated, he adds cautiously, that I'd spent 6 months seeing a university professor from Beijing, who was at Durham University on a secondment, supposedly. Well, I met her whilst meeting a physics professor there, and though I wasn't aware of it at the time, until about 5 months in, it became apparent that there was an underlying agenda. I was actually even offered an opportunity to go and teach at Beijing University, to leave the UK. But I didn't sell out. Indeed, I learned a lot about who this New World Order really are. Is it too much to suggest that in a world of mind control, psychological operations and political deceptions, all of which are acknowledged and often even researched and explained in some detail by said host on his show, or hers, I suggest it is simply daft not to consider that you yourself might be subjected to any one of them. But I do note that you've begun to question Ike publicly, but respectfully, on matters which were available and quite controversial years ago at the time of Ivan Fraser proofreading Ike's books. So I'd suggest that this should long ago have been taken into account, and bringing it up now is, well, playing catch-up as ever. In the episode I'm referring to, he or she spends some time retracting a previous theory as new evidence has been pointed out by viewers. Now, this is something he does quite often, which should inform him that the viewers are moving beyond the sensationalism that's presented in the name of alien control. And whereas I can respect this humble ability to correct previous errors, one has to note that a lot of airtime is taken up doing so, and that meanwhile folk have been misinformed. Though it is exciting, I do admit, and interesting for the many Hardy Boys and the Nancy Drews among us. This could either be seen as an open-minded and fair approach to solving mysteries, or a waste of half your time serving mainly the messenger and keeping the recipient up to date, albeit only with the latest misunderstanding and often with the latest calendar too. And for fuck's sake, no selfies or that dreaded money shot this year either. Now I say this affectionately because I've always liked this fella personally, but this won't and can't get in the way of common sense or constructive criticism or a kick in the proverbials. And I'll challenge any who I perceive to be misleading or misled, but only if they promote themselves to do it. Now his latest project to prove that an abduction of a military man by an Islamist was staged or made up to create fear in the public is one with prima facie merit. But the moment you ask, well, what if he did prove this to be the case? We'd perhaps be faced with the realization that this is something we all knew anyway, and we'd thank him for adding value to what we already knew, albeit in the form of opinions and the sensationalism that they can generate around an accepted theme. Perhaps, I don't know, always looking to justify these actions as serving the greater good. It's fun to prove the already known, but for fuck's sake, dude, I could present a 15-page proof of the fact that 1 + 1 = 2. And yes, it does run that far, simply because what appears obvious actually requires a proof anyway. I've been told by plenty of folk that he considers my research as irrelevant, particularly the prime number cross stuff. Now, Northeast Truth quickly became a platform for UFO-related stuff and the reptile hunters and the Nibiru hunters. And I even had to suffer 2 years of newcomers explaining why they thought money was a scam. Or, as I say, why Nibiru was going to fuck us all yesterday. In fact, my very first appearance on Theo Chalmers' show on Edge Media, I was faced with a call from said UFO researcher, and though I didn't have a clue who he was at the time, asking me if the financial system is controlled by aliens. Well, that was a hell of a first question. Well, I had to smile when I later saw him ask David Cameron, our Prime Minister, about UFO disclosure, and I wondered why he didn't take that opportunity to ask the same question of him. But nevertheless, honestly, there I was, having spent decades researching occult complexities in finance, etc., how they do it and what their goal is, who they are even. There I was, faced with a yes or no question on the telephone, which I think, with hindsight, I answered quite well by suggesting that of course it's a possibility, among others. Had I said yes, I would have spent years being questioned on stuff I could have known no better than he. Had I said no, then I'd be judged as a shill or something by the gatekeeper. And therein lays the problem. A preconceived notion masquerades as inquiring journalism too often. Yet, had he engaged me without a preconceived notion and an attitude which derides anything he doesn't grasp for himself, well, I could have told him about my own abduction experience, or implant experience, and possibly even what I learned and concluded from it. But I chose not to, as it would have run counter to his notions, certainly at the time. There's too many folk out there trying to prove a notion, yet repeatedly getting it wrong on a self-ordained mission to unwrangle truth from events, which they believe they understand from the outset. I always considered such a notion to be stupid in the face of reality, yet we buy their serial failures literally, usually in the form of a calendar or a keyring, doing our bit to fund research gleaned from others and promoted as challenging the system. Please, sir, do note that we note you have advised your followers to ignore the very events which you undeniably should support in principle if you challenge the New World Order, the globalist forces, but you choose to pull the fence-sitting card, which, as I pointed out, will be full of splinters. In an energetic reality such as the one in which we live, irrelevance is never a problem. It's a free choice. Promotion of it, though, is an issue. Hence my challenge to all who think that way. however much it offers them a replacement for mainstream TV. Hey, in Trump's world, you might even get a mainstream show. Now, just to be clear, I'm not naming the person for good reason. As I say, I do respect this fella. I'm trying to make a point, and I'm not trying to use him as the target of it. However, recent comments do require that this be said. He's promoted many relevant issues also, and to be even clearer, one of those issues for sure is the work of Dr. Judy Wood and the detailed thoughts of Andrew Johnson. So I do not, nor could I, attack the integrity of any of the contributors to such a show. Though I could if I got specific in one or two cases, but I'd suggest its host perhaps should get a bit more objective. Journalism isn't about ramming splinters up your own ass, is it? That's not what it's about, is it? Look at the US media today. They're sat on so many spiky splinters, piercing their own realities, that they'll either die or pivot upon a purge. The same can be said of other commentators, but from my perspective, they speak for themselves, as does Andrew and many other worthy contemporaries. So I'm not looking to offend folk, although I'm pretty good at that apparently. I see too many folk fence-sitting, that's the point, because their chosen mentor or their associates indulge in it. Fence-sitting and even occasional daring opinion, soon to be retracted or adjusted though. Yet, if this research is merely an expression of the work of others, and depends upon equal amounts of retractions and confirmations, then, I guess, we aren't looking at a solution here. More wait and see, then reap the glory approach to what is a very real political issue, and it does need to be faced. Now, I've seen him and others use technological understandings as an engineer to prove what I saw with my own eyes and understood not much later than that. Granted, it does help to wake people up, but to what? Someone else's nightmare? My message has consistently been one, and it's been stated with certainty and proof, and I refer to the banking scam and the potential issuance of a national credit note for key infrastructures and systems as an economic solution. I'll always ask myself, though, before I confront anyone on a point of principle or even housekeeping, are they furthering the cause of public understanding of something which is quite simple once it is grasped? And if they are, I'll leave them alone, albeit by my own judgment. Who else's have I got? If anyone has a roadmap, then do give me a fucking copy, but you can't. Now, taking the conspiracy analysis to its ultimate technological and spiritual extreme, I've also promoted my understanding that this prime number cross thing is the key to nature, and therefore all natural sciences, including mathematics and physics, and therefore also to the occult itself. I didn't find it or invent it, it's just there, and it's actually not a theory, as is proven by the fact that it is there for you to look at every level of reality. The only question here is, how much will you look? Just a bit? None at all? Lots? You know, that's the only question really. But then I watch them insult me, but never have big enough balls to challenge me directly without perhaps resorting to ad hominem stuff. But this is one reason why many of these campaign groups, even though they are campaigning on mortgage and debt issues, my specialist subject and something I have stood for all of my certainly working life since I became conscious of it, well, they seem to avoid engaging me. They must. This has always been my indicator that within them there is someone who knows I'm just a learned individual who has no party or society or group, just knowledge and principle, which I'll use against those who deceive others, knowingly or through lack of knowledge. I also know how and why they would do that, which leaves them compromised the moment they engage me. I don't ever wish to sound overconfident in this mysterious world, But I would ask you to notice that nobody does challenge me in the public arena without them revealing themselves for others to judge. Call it an art. It's not really. The point is, I don't sell myself on the back of it. Were I to be such a whore, though, I'd at least try to get the makeup right. There is such a thing as aesthetics. Christ! Hey, it may even prove to resonate to 2732 in this world. Aesthetics, that is. Make of that what you want. My point being, I'm well placed to identify and expose those who have been placed there by political or intelligence agencies, or if they've merely placed themselves there. So, I may get it wrong, but they do need confronting at full volume sometimes because they're not able to defend their case when they are. The good ones will shine through and kick into gear. The wasters simply won't. It's the perfect analog filter system if you think about it. And to those who perceive this as arrogance, I say, no, it's hard-learned. Yet I see the big-name bullies out there crumble and even cry if I challenge them. Only ever when they challenge me, though, without foundation. And just to be clear, yes, Emma or Kate, or whatever your name is. And I must point out, Gaia is an energy, a spirit, a soul, not a place. Yeah, just to be clear. So whatever name you wish to use in your own identity confusion, which kind of enriches you daily from your contributors at your own admission, though you perceive this as the universe telling you that you are loved and right, without realizing you're a cult and a cunt, with a dick apparently, and are actually wrong, which is why you cried like a baby the moment you met your match. So, I regard you as spiritually imbalanced and a deceiver. Never mind. People can try to discredit me. They'll fail to do it beyond the inane. I don't honestly ever recall touching a woman without her permission. And as my life has been a simple one, and my realizations profoundly simple too, ultimately, just buried in complexity and self-generated issues of others usually, it's been a long and a lonely road, and I've had to accept that this must be the case. So, yeah, great song. The Great British Mortgage Swindle premiered at the Tyneside Cinema recently. I've been asked by others to report on what I thought of it, but I'm sorry I'm not able to do so because I didn't receive an invitation, nor did I get a ticket, despite requesting one. They would justify this in their own ways. I've heard it all before. But can you justify it, really? Can you begin to smell the bullshit that I whiffed long ago? I'm used to this. As a specialist in the mortgage arena, a fellow of the Chartered Building Societies Institute, and subsequently a fellow of the Chartered Institute of Bankers, not that I make any great claim for qualifications, indeed the opposite, nevertheless my history is there. I was, indeed, the first in the UK, certainly within the industry, to pick up the baton on the banking and the mortgage scams, passing it not merely to the public and my own clients, but to other minded folk within the industry too. Similarly with the occult aspects and the insights of its controllers, all of which was done by recourse only to my own study, research, explorations of financial and occult realities on the ground, not resorting to Freemasonry or religion or ambition or membership of any secret society, cult, or party political or government bodies. Nobody gave me family chests of knowledge and occult wisdom handed down by Masonic or occult families. I studied systems, natural, occult, and otherwise, and I did this by adopting a core philosophical wisdom tradition of the Druids, to become learned enough by direct study and experience in each field to be able to ask a question of the gatekeeper to that field and to place myself then at the gate. The answer will then be forthcoming and the gates will then often open. Whereas aspects of scholarship and reading were essential to a relatively high level, financial and occult, direct experience. Life was the real on-the-ground tutorial. And it seems ironic that only recently, through the work of Bradbury Court Lindell in America, I find my family bloodline on my mum's side was influential, to say the least, in the establishment of the USA. Indeed, potentially aware of the knowledge passed down by Francis Bacon himself. And I guess, in their own way then, they did deliver a little chest to me in this small way. Point is, it was only after doing all that work and realization, inner and outer, first. Some good folk picked up on the mortgage baton and ran with it, and some did it very well. So did a few others, less benevolent, more political, and religiously or whatever the fuck motivated. Why on earth would they not wish to consult my opinion or utilize my insights, developed over decades in ways that few others could claim? Perhaps they think I'm a dickhead. Well, that'd be valid if they could explain it, or perhaps had even met me. Yet, I've never claimed anything for myself. Always pointed out how clear this subject is for anyone who wants to look at it, and assisted those who did, should they ask or require it, which this lot didn't. With intent, it would appear. Am I bruised? No. I'm proven correct again. It's just that folk haven't been shown why yet. Let me tell you a bit about the mutual building societies, the friendly societies, and the concept of borrowing short-term but lending long-term. It sounds simple, but if you think about it, it's not. And this was the long-learned skill and the mastery of the mutual building society, or the friendly society, established from the very real need for credit, whether you exist in a monetary system or one which exchanges turnips and meat, bison or wheat. It was the case until the Big Bang that a lender, such as those that I worked for, had to take in deposits from savers and investors in order to lend it out. After deducting the cost of paying interest to savers and investors, plus the management costs, you were left with a margin. Call it profit if you will, but this profit went to the reserves, and these were owned by all who saved and invested with the society, or borrowed from it in some cases. This all started in a pub in London centuries ago, when working tradesmen gathered together to finance the building or purchase of their own homes. And they would save, and they would take turns to all come together to build a property, and one would own it, then they'd build the next, and another would own it, and together they became far more than the sum of their parts, and all benefited. Since the Big Bang, though, money itself could be borrowed from the banks. Money became the product, created only as a debt, not as the equivalent value of efforts and trades employed to generate them. And there is your scam. And many blame Thatcher. And whereas there is some blame there, I say that people who claim this are 180 degrees out of phase on that one. But maybe that's for another show, yeah? No one's dared take this one on yet, but guess who's going to? And take note of the often unmentioned dynamic. In a world where interest rates are high, then so is inflation, and the opposite is also true. So, whereas you will pay back a mortgage lender about 3 times what you borrowed due to interest accumulation, everyone seems to lose sight of one thing when they're considering that, and that is that inflation itself decreases the value of your payments, yet your home should increase in value. And this used to be called as safe as houses, only clearly that phrase isn't used as much nowadays, is it? But you could have bought a home in 1978, say, for £25,000 with a £24,000 mortgage and a payment of, let's say, £120 a month. 25 years later, in 2003, you might have sold that home for, let's say, £175,000. And in the years before that, your payment had reduced to, let's say, £80 a month. But as your salary in recent years is £75,000 a year and not £8,000 as it was in 1978, then making those repayments was no real burden to you. Inflation ate away at the mortgage payment too, you see. What was expensive 25 years ago generally isn't today due to that erosion of inflation. Don't get me wrong, I'm not saying inflation's a good thing. It ain't. But there's two sides to the coin. And the crime is not in the lending, nor is it in the interest. It is in the issuance of the money as a debt. We used to have to collect it from savers before lending it out. Now they just borrow numbers on a screen from a bank and lend it out at a margin. Cancer. So many folk get tied down in the scrutiny of the mortgage itself, bleating about unfair rules, interest, usury, and the rest of it. Let me assure you, most of these are simply broken folk moaning about their own bad choices and blaming others, distracting an interested audience from the real issues and diverting them into a pit which is little more than one filled with communists, socialists, and Marxists. And they spin their trash and paint it new colours, the colours of freedom from the New World Order. Yeah? Yet they are the New World Order at work, as much as those who create money out of nothing, and to incite you into a political activity, a protest, some of which may be worthy, but seriously, most of it is organised political infiltration, and too many, I believe, are not aware of this. A casual observer of this particular financial reform circle, for it is a circle, not only in the UK but worldwide, you'll notice the strange congruence of money, financial, legal reform, judge arresting, system baiting, driving without insurance, occult religion, and Puritanesque Old Testament-y Christianity, Judaism, and a bit of science too. Even the flat earth followers find comfort in this particular Garden of Eden, constantly seeking serpents whilst partying with Adam and Eve, and nowadays even Adam and Steve, but never seeing the spiders. It saddened me for 2 years how many free men went to court without ever having read the Canadian Supreme Court ruling, which instructed judges in the British Her Majesty's domains how to deal with you. It was painful to watch. And when these folk claimed to be challenging the system themselves, what? Without even knowing what the enemy was armed with, or wanting to know when it's there for you to read, however much you might hate reading it. So it was just bullshit, really, wasn't it? Yet there are those who have truly made headway on these base concepts. Truly made headway. But with a completely different resonance and approach. So I do hope to report on more detail here in future presentations. I'm reserving today's show for, let's say, bleating about the negatives. So this isn't an attack on the Freeman movement as a whole. I'm saying that the Freeman movement is largely, obfuscating key stuff beneath all of this bullshit. Yeah? Many seem confused while still being fascinated at the underlying resonances that they find in the Freeman and the lawful name movement, never quite understanding how these things might converge, or in who or what's name. And some will tell you it's Satan, but I bet you it's not. They even became scared of their own names, disowning it and all it represents, publishing this fact on advertising billboards around the country. Seriously, if you want to wake people up to a reality, then these folk chose to use an occult method specifically designed to do the opposite, whilst claiming knowledge of the occult themselves. Well, it would appear they've got very little beyond some Harry Potter level of occult indoctrination in this post-rational age. And those who did have insight, those we admired, look at how they shamed themselves in their own mirrors, be it the flat earth or just plain old mental breakdown. And all too often, in a courtroom, or usually outside of them, trying to get away with fines for driving without insurance or similar parking fines, whatever, yet never actually bloody succeeding anyway. What the fuck? I always got their point. I just always saw the approach as programmed and ineffectual, controlled opposition, if you will.
Please, listen. I've got one or two things to say. Look, you've got it all wrong. You don't need to follow me. You don't need to follow anybody. You've got to think for yourselves. You're all individuals. Yes, we're all individuals. You're all different. Yes, we are all different. I'm not.
Oh, there's another component too, have you noticed? Fear. Or the threat of damnation if you don't believe them or do what they tell you to do. And an apparent need to dress like trashy girlies. What's worse, though, is that they do it with, no style whatsoever. They need you to believe that your God was androgynous, yet they seem to interpret androgyny as cheap sartorial trash. I'm sure Baphomet ain't really a big-mouth slapper with sexual identity issues now, is he? I bet that's not what the message was. Have you noticed, though, how, due often to some admitted and admittedly unfortunate sexual trauma and the subsequent gender and identity confusion, all of which is kind of there in normal human psychology, they decide that their given name is a corporate monster, which they have to disown, so you must so do as well. I wonder who assaulted them so horribly. But must we all suffer the darkness of your lost identities? Get it back, man, or woman, or whatever the fuck you want to be known as. So long as you're known, eh?
I do feel, Reg, that any anti-imperialist group like ours must reflect such a divergence of interest within its power base.
Agreed. Francis? Yeah, I think Judith's point of view is very valid, Reg. Provided the movement never forgets that it is the inalienable right of every man or woman to rid himself or herself. Agreed. Thank you, brother. Or sister. Where was I?
I think you finished.
Oh, right.
Furthermore, it is the birthright of every man or woman. Why don't you shut up about women, Stan? You're putting us off.
Women have a perfect right to play a part in our movement, Reg.
Why are you always on about women, Stan?
I want to be one.
What?
I want to be a woman. From now on, I want you all to call me Loretta.
What?
It's my right as a man.
Well, why do you want to be Loretta, Stan?
I want to have babies.
You want to have babies?
It's every man's right to have babies if he wants them.
But you can't have babies.
Don't you oppress me.
I'm not oppressing you, Stan. You haven't got a womb. Where's the fetus going to gestate? You're going to keep it in a box?
Here, I've got an idea. Suppose you agree that he can't actually have babies, not having a womb, which is nobody's fault, not even the Romans, but that he can have the right to have babies.
Good idea, Judith. We shall fight the oppressors for your right to have babies, brother. Sister, sorry.
What's the point?
What?
What's the point of fighting for his right to have babies when he can't have babies?
It is symbolic of our struggle against oppression.
Symbolic of his struggle against reality.
They then try to convince others of the damage that their ego does to them. Get you to disown your own identity, often before you've even found it anyway. And they'll link it to hell and damnation, and bingo! It's not that I don't understand the principle they allude to, because I do. It's just that I think they actually don't. You see, they only go so far with their work, but there's much, much more. It doesn't require a psychologist to point out the potential issues relating to the removal of your core personal identity, a bit like the "we're all one" meme, which is always the backdrop wallpaper behind this anyway. And if you aren't aware of the potential consequences, look around you at the billboards or listen to some of them speak endlessly about their woes and their weaknesses in the name of freedom, or to challenge the satanic banks. You know,
I've nothing but my name. I've nothing but my name.
Clearly, they choose not to inform you of this side of it. And if they are ignorant of it, particularly when they claim occult insight, then perhaps they're not the spiritual masters that some might consider them to be. Just saying. Perhaps They are just the initiates of the spider's web that is the darker aspect of the Abrahamic and occult religious indoctrination in the first place. Not all of them, of course. There are wonderful exceptions who are their own validation. I must tell you about Dave Jarvu on internet radio and the 2 painful hours I'll never regain. A lot more, actually. You know, self-pitying indulgence in the name of truth, and, it would seem, lots of lefty bullshit too. Now, Dave had a mortgage, and in 2007 he heard, by listening to shows perhaps like mine, that the system was collapsing. So he, hoping to take advantage of it financially, sought out a tracker mortgage. Now, he got a bit confused as to whether he approached the broker or whether the broker approached him, but, you know, I think we can guess. Anyway, the rate dropped and he benefited so much that his mortgage was, I believe, 6 months in advance or something like that. His tracker mortgage expired 2 years later, but he claims that he thought the tracker was for life, so well, actually, he didn't complain. Had he kind of done that, as I've always suggested people should do, through the official system, then he would have got to, well, I would suggest exactly where he is today, years on, after so many court appearances, and God, it's pitiful, actually. Never mind, his tracker expires, and he claims that he thought it was for life, so he's talking to these people. Now, of course, this guy's done his research. He's read every fucking law book that is, well, available on the nearest bookshop shelf. He spent, obviously, hundreds of pounds on some of these things. The mortgage one itself cost, I think, £570. Guess the cash flow was all right, Dave, yeah? Never mind. He complains about gaslighting. You know, this is where somebody makes you feel like you don't know very much, and they you know, you feel like they're taking the piss out of you a bit because you don't quite understand. Well, perhaps you didn't understand, Dave. Perhaps you were, in your own way, gaslighting them, yeah? With your obnoxious, pseudo-fucking intellectual approach to it. So he didn't, in fact, consider that he was treating them like a twat, yeah? Because that's how he acts. And he claims to have dealt with a broker. He claims lots of stuff. He talks about how bipolar he was and how he was depressed and how all this came about because of the way that these people were kind of gaslighting him and pressuring him in his life. And oh dear, it was awful. And he got a job, and it was a great job, and the income was fine. And well, clearly on the back of that, he did a self-certified mortgage, telling them that he did have this job. I suspect that's what you did, really, isn't it, Dave? You had a self-certified mortgage, because there's an awful lot that you've talked about in your show. In fact, every single thing you've talked about is nonsense. You even try to use a well-known mortgage case, yeah, to support your case, whereas in fact your case, well, you know, I don't know the details of it, and that's the problem. You don't actually present them. All you've done is witter about a load of shit. Whereas if in fact you'd put in an official complaint under the MCOB regulations, I think it is, you would have had all of the documents that you claim that the lender doesn't actually have anyway. Yeah. Oh, and I did also note that amongst those things, you did let slip that there was a deed of assignment. I need to point out to you that was for probably an endowment. Bet you cashed your endowment in, didn't you, eh? At some point, eh? We don't know these facts, and that's my point. Never mind, the good news for you all out there is that Dave Jarvu, this man with his in-depth knowledge, of the law and so on. Oh, dearie me, barristers study for fucking years to get detailed knowledge and so on. This guy opens a book and then acts like a retard. And that's the problem, actually. So many of them do. They've got their own issues. This man made his own choices, and he did them out of greed. And he's claimed every benefit going. He knows every inside-out detail of them all, yeah? And we're supposed to believe that he humbly approaches these people. This could just be Joan around the corner, you know? She lives around the corner from you. She doesn't know about this shit. And you're teaching her none of it. by acting like a twat. Anyway, back to the point. Dave Jarvu, as a result of his tremendous insights, now has a radio show, so you can all enjoy that one. No offence intended to the host station. Good luck to them. But, you know, to me, this is just the level of idiocy. That's what it is. It's idiocy. And people are out there sucking it up. I could have solved Dave Jarvu's fucking problem for him, yeah? Just like, now what was the name of the case? I think it was it Tom Crawford? Anyway, same thing. All of these extraneous parties are getting involved and giving advice, and it always goes wrong. No one actually gets anything sorted, yeah? Both of those cases I could have sorted within just a few days, yeah? Without them losing their home, by doing it probably the right way. And to me, that kind of involves not acting like a bunch of especially when your knowledge is, well, absent, yeah? So there you go. That's my rant on mortgages. If you feel affronted by it, come and test the knowledge out, yeah? 'Cause you don't, do you? Never mind. Let's move on a bit. So, I was talking about the name thing, wasn't I? And how they have to disown it. So, what are the consequences of removing your core identity, do you think?
I've nothing but my name.
Look around you, look at the billboards, listen to these people speak. You'll then get the idea.
Romanes eunt domus. People call Romanes, they go the house. It says Romans go home. No, it doesn't. What's Latin for Roman?
You're making in law, because he'd also said, he says, I can't forward your claims because you have no legal basis. And I didn't pick up on it at first, and then I said legal. You said legal. And he smiled, as like, oh, the penny's dropped, has it? Because I wrote a lawful claim.
Come on. Romanus? Goes like. Anus? Vocative plural of anus is. Annie? Romani.
I put everything down as per the law, the contract law, the common law, and I also used a little bit of statute, which is based on the Consumer Credit Act about unfair contracts and relationships, which the district judge has the power to quash.
Eunt? What is eunt? Go. Conjugate the verb to go. Here, eo is it, imus, itis, eunt. So eunt is? Third person plural, present indicative. They go. But Romans go home is an order, so you must use the... imperative. Which is? E. How many Romans? Plural, ite.
That. They've done wrong here, they've done me wrong there.
Nominative. Go home. This is motion towards, isn't it, boy? Dative. Dative. Not the dative. No. The accusative. Domum, sir. Domum. Except that Thomas takes the locative. Which is domum.
It's up to them to prove that they've not treated you unfairly.
Understand? Yes, sir. Now write out 100 times.
So I sent them a revocation of power of attorney, and it's not a power of attorney, a removal of rights of implied access.
If you listen to the show, and you can do that by just Googling Dave Jarvu talk shit, I'm sure it'll be there on YouTube. You know, listen to the show. He bleats for 2 hours, yet manages to avoid telling you anything. He has no details. That's my point. And everything he does say just kind of proves the case, which he hasn't stated clearly anyway. If he'd approached his broker, they have everything he's talking about. By law, a simple complaint would have got you as far as you have with your current multiple court appearances. So, many of these folk are genuine. That's what bugs me. I spent every day of my working life dealing with these genuine people. Motivated and caring individuals out there working with and around people like Dave Sorry to slag you off, mate, but your first radio appearance really is bullshit, so I'm calling it out now. Anyway, I applaud them, and I mean them no disservice. In fact, I'm always at theirs. Among them, however, are the usual suspects.
So it was going to be relisted within the 6 weeks. Well, my parents were away, and the reason why they a little bit involved is because they've actually had to step in and pay off the arrears. And I don't want them to really, but as a last resort, rather than lose your property.
Remember that the nature of such stuff is that you don't realise what you are caught up in until you look and feel completely fucking stupid and or broke. Even then you'll resist the obvious. Look at the Ken O'Keefe nightmare, for example. Some of these constitutional warriors and so-called freemen on the land, or the lawful namers, who have misled the movement and caused it enormous harm with their deep ignorance of contract and or biblical law and history, some of them literally mentally unbalanced by their lack of knowledge and or their biblical and satanic indoctrinations. If your name is Barbara of the family Windsor or similar, make sure your bra is tight, if you haven't burned it already. It's time to confront the communists, the social justice warriors, the New World Order occultists, these agents, basically, infiltrators with political opinions, based upon misunderstanding of facts anyway, usually. And true magi would not be out there in the public teaching mind-altering shit to those who don't understand it, and particularly never to those who never will. Moreover, though, they wouldn't want to anyway. In the occult world, don't we know this, yeah? The outcome of such behaviour is well known, and this is what you see around you now. Go ponder. None of this is to dismiss the validity of the film, which I applaud in principle, and has many good folk at its core. But I won't easily be misdirected or tricked by, dare I say, their clever linguistics and their lawfulese. Yeah. Seriously, their bottom line argument when you challenge them is that you don't understand universal commercial code. Well, I do, and I understand the depths of the subject they profess to, which is, of course, why they consistently failed to even ask for an opinion. Really? This is about not only changing the system, but ensuring that it's not re-ensnared by the webs that have been woven to do just that. And talking of webs, are you aware that the Templars of the Middle Court claim divine right to apply common law and the evolving statute law in the UK on the basis that they hold the remains of the character known as Jesus Christ? Are you, as a freeman on the land, aware that Jesus Christ toured the British Isles as he compiled the common law and researched the needs of the people to embody it in statute law, precedent and equity? Do you know that your enemy believes these things, at least? The problem that one faces here is that were you to satisfy yourself that what I've just said is a reality, then you have to place that knowledge into an existing framework of understanding. But it's that religious framework which is so wrong. Hence, understanding evades all but those who truly wish to understand. Even once an inquiring mind and an open mind has perceived that truth, they must then confront its implications as they find themselves living in a world which is created and managed by magi, with the population enslaved. Whilst we are distracted by the sad tales of broken men in courtrooms who didn't or wouldn't or couldn't pay their mortgage, or the meanderings of a respected researcher, however far or near they may be from reality, the resistance to the global New World Order takes centre stage, and all that some are equipped to express is their own lack of knowledge or belief. You know, some would be saying it's just another stage show and that perhaps we should invent names for politicians instead of engaging real forces, instead of engaging the energies which are coming soon to the UK. Indeed, they're already here and well-formed, So I suggest that if you don't understand them, don't speculate too negatively in these times. It's disingenuous to sit on an eternal fence explaining why you fell off or celebrating jumping the right way occasionally. But I guess that's where friends and audiences lay. Indeed, that's one reason why I maintain a distance from such indulgence, preferring to keep away from the spider's lair wherever possible. Beyond that which I considered necessary, or didn't see, to pass a greater message to those with an ear to hear it. Whether a creator exists or whether reality is the result of random interactions in some indefinable everything, whether we are holographic projections in someone else's nightmare, or whether we are stardust or plasma beings, we are able to apply reason, and by applying it to that which we can observe, the order of things on all scales, we can begin to see the answer emerging from the ancient past, here today, in our times. I have not seen one of these folk ever engage with the provable, whereas occult science is, by definition. Falsified history is. The nature of reality is. The structure of the universe, I would suggest, is. And the nature of infinity is. Why don't they tell you about these things? Why do they just prefer to mystify about them? I can only hazard a guess, but as there are only two options, I'm quite confident of my position. They actually don't have a clue, falling as they did for the rise of neo-Gnosticism. How many of you, for example, have heard that because the Bible refers to Elohim, and because this is a plural word, there must have been the multiple gods? And this is the key to merging Gnosticism with ancient aliens. The problem is, it's just not true, okay? It's an unresearched opinion, merely repeated by repeaters, yet provable nonsense, and therefore is one key to exposing the truth you all seek about our history. But it is a necessary component of the operation to create one global religion and to maintain the real secret as ever. Look, back to this agent thing, this honey trap thing, yeah? I'm not going to be making any great revelations about this. There are none. No names, for example. This really isn't about that. I kind of learned so much from a couple of interactions that I don't doubt that should any of the individuals hear this, they would have to admit that I perhaps understood a bit more than they did about their own specialist subject and their paymasters at that level, which they perhaps had not considered. So, I consider the meetings mutually informative, and this has proven to be the case at least once. I didn't stumble in naively, though I'm no James Bond. Danger Mouse! Why would I mention it at all? Well, it's simple. Having realised on one previous occasion what I'd stumbled into, I took the opportunity to learn all I could when it happened again. This time even exploring the halls and libraries at Cambridge University, and one or two involvements with the John Dee Society, for want of a better word there. One of the things I learned was that others from within the UK truth movement were also seen at that location. Need I say more? And as I had realised who and what they were, this left me with only one question. Who is the handler and who is the handled? Now, before the Second World War, it has been officially confirmed that every pub and community had an informant employed by security services to pass observations back to their handlers. Do you think that they've stopped? Anyway, before we all start screaming and doubting our girlfriends and boyfriends and partners, don't. It would be clear to you. There would be many unexplained circumstances, such as wealth where poverty and benefits are claimed. But the real giveaway comes in the apparent desire to convince you of something, whatever it may be, or to learn something about you. And one example, a person who was particularly studied in Islam by life, and with a special interest in and knowledge of the jinn. My own research and studies in Kabbalah, Sufism, Druidry, and occult science generally, and its history, allowed me a good insight into that subject, so I was quite able to engage a detailed exchange of thoughts and opinions. It was clear, though, that my own thoughts were not entirely well received, you might say, but that's the nature of such an exchange, I guess. One point which received vehement opposition was when I stated my belief that, with regard to Islam, an immediate goal was to create a new caliphate, and that this would be done very soon. Now, this was rejected in superior knowledge, apparently, as the foolish and dangerous ravings of people like me, I was told. I was perhaps being lumped in with her other visitors, and I was told that I know nothing about Islam or the jinn, and that to suggest that a global caliphate was an objective of the religion of peace was to know nothing. Well, I've learned that knowledge is a zero sum, so I didn't object philosophically, but I did take note when, less than a year later, my prediction was proven quite accurate. I've read the Quran, I've studied its critics, its apologists, I have studied the hadiths, the surahs, and studied their prophets, studied their history, and realized the academic realities surrounding them also, like the schizophrenic nature of the Quran itself. It's internally contradictory in a fairly random way. But when you realize that it contains two books, the paragraphs of which were intermingled almost randomly, you can understand the contradictions and remove them to reveal the reality of the teachings of the Prophet. Most who claim insight into Islam, though, would overlook this, and they're just caught up in the duality intentionally created. I've had many opportunities to meet with Muslims on a social basis, and I had a couple only recently. One very kind Muslim man and his wife actually rescued me from a very distressing situation only a couple of weeks ago in London. I needed help, and his name was Ahmed, and we embraced as we parted. You know, it was quite a moment. I needed help, and the man who helped me was a Muslim named Ahmed, and we talked. We parted. And he said, we all need each other. And that is my message in these times too, because we really do. What we don't need, however, and Ahmed acknowledges this, is a Trojan horse. Yeah, we do not need that Trojan horse. And my experience informs me that the Muslim communities are well aware of this possibility. They can see it even before their own eyes. I'm quite clear on the role of Islam in today's politics and the issues surrounding it. Immigration, racism, Islamophobia, etc. You know, I've found that my knowledge of their own religion is often met with respect, but sometimes suspicion too. And I can see why. They are a loving people. And just like the Christians and the seculars in the UK, they have individual lives, loves, hopes and fears, just like everybody. There is no space for racism. Islam is not a race, though. It's an ideology, and in my opinion, these loving and principled Muslims are likely to be led to a situation where they are just as misled as the Christians are, for example. Indeed, it's through their religions that they are being misled by fear. Both are ideologies, but Islam is a racist one. It's fascist and it is violent in the extreme. I mean, look around you for God's sake anyway. It's ignorant and it's dangerous too. The people were and are wonderful, but they all clearly stated, with no prompting on my part, that when the day comes that they are a majority, they will have no choice but to bow down to the Sharia and to turn against those who have shown them discrimination for years. No hope in burying our heads then. This is as real as any invasion in history. But this time, Only the generals, not the soldiers, and the people themselves, know that it's an invasion, yet. Now, Christianity is just simple Judaism with foreskins. The mind of believers in the Abrahamic religions are all controlled via the mystical elements, the angels, the demons, and the mysticism of numbers and life after death. This is Kabbalah and Sufism. The more practical minds, more close to the mystical, are controlled by the politics of life principles such as abortion, homosexuality, and the modern curse of social justice, giving every twat with an opinion and a big mouth an implied right to shout their own form of racist, sexist bigotry. Largely at white males, I might add. Everywhere a division. Where Kabbalah is, so is control through Judaic mysticism. Where Sufism is, there goes Wahhabism. They are the same, and the Catholic Church simply mastered this occulted reality a long time ago. As I continue with my witterings in this and other upcoming podcasts, always keep sight of the fact that the Templars crossed the Catholic Church with its own brand of learned Sufism, and when you piece the story together, you can see that we are now, as we were then, in the midst of an ongoing battle for supremacy. Don't take sides until you know who the opponents are. I mean,
none shall pass. I have no quarrel with you, good Sir Knight, but I must cross this bridge. Then you shall die. I command you, as King of the Britons, to stand aside. I move for no man.
we hear about the plight of Muslim refugees, economic or otherwise, and we mourn in our morning coffees, unable to do much. So we act like bigots, calling those racist who wouldn't sympathise with their moral cause in knowledge that their cause has been created for the specific purpose of the Islamification of the West, to cause such conflict. If such thoughts offend you at your office water fountains, then take up cleansing telephones for a career. Consider then the period of Islamic occupation prior to the Crusades. You see, we're all taught to feel shame for the period known as the Crusades. All the things that the bad white men did, yeah? Just as they did in the slave trade era. With the collusion of the black men, I would add, but, can't say that, can you? It's all nonsense, you see. Merely playing upon ignorance of reality and your determination to program your own by the input of your surrounding indoctrinations only. But just look at history prior to the Crusades, because we can now. And what do you find? The same barbarism we see enacted today by Islam on the same path to global domination through Sharia. Consider then that we're told even by our own leadership today, the Prime Minister herself saying that aspects of Sharia could be beneficial in the UK. I saw this one arise when I was in the mortgage industry, so I took a particular interest in Sharia mortgages and their claim to be ethical. There'll be more on this as we progress, but suffice to say for now that this is bollocks, and it truly concerns me to see a money and mortgage reform movement which, knowingly or otherwise, to be fair, is softening the way for just such a thing. Don't get me wrong, they're not campaigning for it yet, but it is waiting stage right for a grand entrance at some point, whether those involved with it realise it or not. And that's before we even get to think about the Bradbury pound and the issuance of a national credit note. I really don't know how much or little I can cover tonight, but this subject will arise through the coming shows, however many or indeed few they turn out to be. I believe that no creator would ever create anything conscious which was not able to understand at some quantitative level its place in that creation. Indeed, to me, that is so provable at every scale of observation that the only questionable factor nowadays is what is observation. So here we meet Einstein's classroom bullshit. It's a good question to bind the philosophical and the scientific minds into irrelevance. Whatever it is your reality. and I could claim that I seek peace, and only peace, and that indeed would be the driving energy on my chosen path, but I'd be constantly faced with the reality of opposing opinions and interests in a world ripe for their taking, particularly if they are strong, if you haven't noticed already. Yet strength and survival are not inherent in nature beyond a certain parameter. You could be as strong as fuck, but you simply would melt away had your flamingo display taken place at Tunguska at the wrong moment, or you could, in your strength, always step under a bus. Though, judging by the frequency of my local 308 service, that is an exponentially unlikely scenario as time passes. Or a passing rhino might trample a potential tyranny. Who knows? I'd put my overdraft on a comet. Not Nibiru, though. That's another episode, perhaps. But I couldn't think of a more obvious psyop, woven well between the reality and the current paradigms, even evolving with them. To quote Douglas Adams from Hitchhiker's Guide, we have attained normality. Anything you still can't cope with is your own problem. The problem is, though, that for many, the problems of misunderstandings are not their own. They don't own them. They share them and their misunderstanding in an information age, resulting in the exponential increase in confusion and the resulting problems, egotistical, mental, spiritual, political, and, well, so much else. If you think about it, as a society enters an information era, it seems logical that a generation or so into that, there is an information overload, if it hasn't been channeled effectively. Look around you. Am I innocent of the same spreading of misunderstanding? Probably not entirely, though I learned at an early age in this very real and very criminal world to keep as much powder dry as possible. To discover its efficacy, if you will, by detailed research and logical application of the results to test it, at least to proof of concept, before ever telling others what it is that I've learned and how. I say I'm not entirely innocent of the kind of sophistry I'm referring to, largely because I was compelled, as most seem to be, to explain the knowledge and justify it and myself constantly to family and friends who witness my involvements at least at some level, but couldn't understand them. Well, how could they, when in fact that was my own goal? Here we meet the bars of the prison we build. Much as the inner compulsion is to explain and persuade in order that they understand you and support you, it's often driven by insecurity, uncertainty, a desire or a need for acceptance, in the face of all you ever thought you knew being proven to be wrong. The loneliness it induces, a fact which those to whom we defer and seek support simply don't yet understand themselves. This is the mental battle. It became so much easier once I'd accepted that it wasn't their role in their own life or in mine to understand, but I consciously chose to focus that wasted energy and time on further understanding for myself, sharing it only then with those who asked with some degree of insight already for themselves, who would naturally come into my life if I was living my life naturally, a principle I believe well learned by the secret societies, so often condemned by those who can't work out why their input wasn't needed. To what end, though? Survival and the furtherance of the uncovering, understanding, and removal of that which creates the dire human condition we all face today. Though it has to be said, most in the West have turned a blinded eye to it in favour of ignorance and shamocracy, forming elite groups and societies which know the falsity of general popular mythology, yet don't necessarily know the truth, just another compartment of it. Even the secret societies, once based upon knowledge and care for humanity as a whole, respect for Mother Earth and abidance of sacred physical principles, are now taken over by Luciferian, perverted Christianity or Sufi mysticism, indoctrinated by centuries of belief in Gnosticism among the elite and wealthy influencers. My research has me so far as to be able to see the very Kabbalistic fraud at the centre of all that became known as Western occultism. Yet I'd struggled to relate it to you yet. But did you not notice that every avenue in Western occult tradition, from Dr. John Dee through Aleister Crowley, etc., has and did have very direct Secret Service and intelligence and encryption connections? And I suggest to you that this, a bit like political correctness, both playing with the dialectic, is the elephant in your empty room. Indeed, it seems illogical to assume anything otherwise. So why do we? Because it's exciting. It engages Nancy Drew.
And the bank's collateral is now at 37% nationwide, and he had a little wry smile on his face as if to say, we've done what we said we were going to do, and it's basically helped them become lawful.
The Kabbalistic kingdoms from Kitha to Malkuth, they're well, kind of interesting, aren't they? Meanwhile, those in the real know fuck with your simple minds. But you're not so simple, really, are you? You kind of dig what I'm saying. So go explore your own ripples. They all meet the same shoreline. There's only one, and I'm not trying to convince you that the one I see ahead is any more relevant than yours, merely that only one will prevail. The other requires human intervention, masquerading as socialist justice warrior types, and boy do they keep intervening. Even on our financial battlefield, even today. I don't know how to say it more clearly, but in a natural world, any system which requires as its lifeblood a flow of money derived from the taxation and the consequential micro-government of those it feeds from can only be described as a cancer. The same could be said of free market capitalism, incidentally, but only and specifically in circumstances such as those we experience today, whereby the markets are not free but are strictly controlled by financiers within the system, as has been proven so many times in recent years, if only to numb the public perception to the vastness of this fraud. Without them, the interveners, the parasites, the middlemen, where money is the product and the exchange mechanism. Without them, we all prosper. The only reason we don't is because of them, and because we lack the understanding to see the obvious. We've been taught that way. It took me years of learning to see through it, even in their own classrooms. So I hold no contempt for the layperson to whom this is confusing. Hence, I guess, my surprise at being asked, first off, if it's all run by aliens. Today, though, I would answer no. You've missed the point, perhaps. By accepting the spin, which in your eagerness to promote mystery while splintering your ass with a sharp fence top, only feeds your belief system. Take UFOs as a classic example, or ancient aliens, and you may wish to think that you're adding something, but I fail to see how, in a world dominated by the media, where it is already the most watched kind of show on TV. You see, the world gets it. Every night at 7:30, actually. So where's the mystery, dude? Don't you see how you're being played in a disclosure that's already been made? Perhaps you'll report on it in a few years. Meanwhile, a challenge exists against those who have imposed their will upon the world. Miss it and be even more irrelevant. Anyone can report on shit after the event. Anyone can mystify. So get to the core of it. Let me give you another example. Again, referring to previous work of mine concerning the relevance of a particular number. That number being 2732. There has been much investigation and comment on this since it was highlighted, and all of it is confirmatory, but there is more for those who have followed this, and if you haven't, you may wish to catch up from previous vids. on YouTube. There's much to summarize, too much to summarize here again, but do add these facts or disprove them to what is known so far, and then let me expand upon it where it must lead if I'm correct in my perception. But I'd encourage a test at any time. Could one be perceived or engineered by, well, some of these self-professed engineers, electrical or physical? I've done the math as best I can and it complies, but it's beyond my personal ability to prove this stuff or to pin it down. So perhaps you can. It remains another elephant in the room relating to global axis shift in recorded history, due to the addition of mass to planet Earth, observed and even explained and understood by surviving societies at some level. In his book, The Riddle of Prehistoric Britain, Commons Beaumont, who was born in 1873, I think it was. Yes, it was. Sorry, just checking my stuff here. Yeah, 1873 to 1956. He starts with a quote by Francis Bacon. It says, "Read not to confuse and confute, nor to believe and take for granted, but to weigh and consider. Histories make men wise." And on page 64 he refers to the work of a man called Donnelly, who shows that the terrestrial orbit around the Sun was adjusted by gravity based on specific weight. The result was that days were added to the previous year of 360 days, as to which a simple computation shows that an additional deposit was equal to, now get this, 0.00273% of its previous weight, and thus compelled our planet by the law of gravitation to enlarge its orbit accordingly. Such a recession from our Sun necessarily reduced the strength of the Sun's rays, a permanent effect, one of several. Those 5 1/4 days have long puzzled historians. So, the geometric global grid was a balancing adjustment to the tilt, this is suggesting, which they measured accurately by alignments, and it was also an adjustment to the rotational speed. This was caused by the addition of a mass. Now, this being a comet or similar. Hence the global grid was a balancing adjustment to the tilt, which they measured accurately by alignments, and the rotational speed, an additional 5 1/4 days per year, induced by that additional mass. But an adjustment to what? Well, it could only be the planetary flow of an essential energy, or a torsion between them as a template of the local environment. And by local I mean planetary and solar system wide. By torsion I mean a shear pressure, and one would not be surprised to find that this is expressed in the Great Pyramid as the tangent of the slope angle itself, 2732, as it exerts a shear pressure against the ether, for want of a better word, long known to exist and now fully explained by the electric universe theory. The only theory, incidentally, in the history of science that I'm able to uncover to pass every essential scientific test of prediction and observation it's made so far. And it's a science long known to the ancients too. In fact, let's push this speculation to the forefront. Take a look at easy water. That's the 4th phase of water. You can read about this in a book by Gerald Pollack, which very much ties into the electric universe, but he describes the identifiable feature of this amazing state of water, proven and observable in laboratories, as its optical absorption peak, being a characteristic 270 nanometers. Now, this is expressed within a range as not identified yet explicitly, and I wonder if it will be 273.2 nanometers. The point is that this is a resonant reality, and in a resonant reality, something can nearly be, yeah? In a resonant reality, it nearly is, and it clearly exists. So I guess it's within acceptable parameters, is what I'm saying, or it wouldn't be there at all. Some call this circular reasoning, and I agree. I just regard geometry differently to you. If you were to suddenly have a revelation whilst pondering the data, the numbers, it wouldn't be because you can do the numbers. Rather, it will be because you have been able to ask yourself the question to which the data is the answer. It's not in the answer, which is interesting enough. It's in the question. Do you see? Let's look at Professor Tom, respected and renowned for his work upon ancient measurements and monuments. What do you think we're going to find there? A whole bunch of random numbers, maybe, at first sight. But let me quote from a document I obtained years ago, written by a Dr. A.M. Davey, and highlighted at my Manchester talk a couple of years back. In this paper, he talks about Professor Tom's work. And he says, when Professor Tom set out to prove that men in ancient times used a unit of measure, which he proposed was 2.732 feet, and showed sufficient evidence to convince many hardline archaeologists that he was correct, he didn't know that this unit was associated with the number of seeds of unhusked barley that there were in an inch Scotch. It would appear also that he did not know the unit which he named the megalithic yard was already named in antiquity. The measure of 2.732 feet Scotch was known as an Gaelic aya. Now I can't say that, so I'm going to spell it. It's A-N, then another word, G-E-A-L-A-C-H, and then another word, E-I-L-L-E, or a lunar aya. I'm sure you can get lunar for yourself. The search into other ancient units might not have been initiated had not Professor Tom shown that in ancient times men were experienced in mathematics to a very high degree. Had he stated that the megalithic yard was 0.83270612 meters, no one would have been able to solve the enigma of the standing stones and the stone circles. So, are you confused in this time of revolution? Yeah? Do you not find it intriguing that also, according to Commons Beaumont, Donald Trump's uncle was the man who took possession of Tesla's equipment? Coincidence of history unfolding, maybe? Either way, take a position. Don't let the fence spike your ass too long, especially if research is your living. I even suggest that we could activate the pyramid again using the 2732 frequency as a base. All we would need would be to couple an oscillator to the pyramid. So, you see, there's even room for a mini-moog in that experiment. Just lots of politics and reality in the way. And now, to close, really, there were one or two things I said I'd probably talk about tonight, but I've not really got the time to do any justice to them. So just to mention some of the most interesting questions. Druids and the one world religion. I want to look at how the Druid orders are being manipulated and what could happen if they stood as one body against this religious, financial and spiritual tyranny, hand in hand with Christians and Muslims. It's Stonehenge, you see, was only given that name in more recent times, you know. It's certainly not what it used to be known as. And the rumour that it was once called Stonehenge in honour of the Neolithic ultra-feminist movement is just contrived neo-feminist bollocks or labia. But it arises periodically. I want to take a look, or a greater look, at what I call the Gnostic lie and the occult deception. I wonder why Dr. John Dee had a big nose.
Listen, I'm only telling the truth. You have got a very big nose.
Who was Elias Ashmole? And why did he have a big nose too? Yeah? Who was Francis Bacon? And why all the mystery? I want to look at why 1 is a prime number and what that means when you don't know the question it answers. I also want to look at things like peace, unity and social justice are being used as the weapon of the establishment, basically, in this silent war, a term we've all heard before. Why do I think of Shazam every time I hear the word onomatopoeia? Yeah? And what is onomatopoeic for the relief expressed at passing a good motion, yeah? And should there be any vowels in it? And if so, what do they represent?
So I sent them a revocation of power of attorney. And it's not a power of attorney, a removal of rights of implied access. I had to fight, my back's been to the wall, and I've had to fight, and I've had to dig deep, learn things that I never really thought I ever needed to know. And ultimately, so far, touch wood, it's served me well. I'm still here. They've not got the mitts on it. They can't seem to get an order, because to do that, they've got to face an investigation. So, yeah, anyway, next question. I'm rambling.
Andy, you need to turn your mic on, mate.
Yeah, no, that's not a problem. Rambling's not a problem. I think we're out of questions right now.
So, perhaps until the next show, I should let it go at that. But the episodes hopefully will be frequent and short in length and broad in perspective. All essential qualities of a really good poo, but responding to events and memes as they unfold and bringing a whole new meaning to the phrase truth movement. So, until the next time, I remain affectionately yours, Sir Mark of Brigantia, Knight of the East, guardian of and pretender to the sunken throne of Doga. It's actually known as Dogger Land nowadays, but, well, you know, I don't have a car. Nostalgia.
Not being able to put the heating on, I wouldn't have had electricity, I've had no broadband to do anything. If they'd have had their way, and this is what you've got to recognise, when they're doing that, if you could calculate in your mind that in several months' time all your money's going to be gone, then that's called it's foreseeable, because you can see a point where your money's going to disappear and you can't support yourself. So that, when you say it's totally foreseeable, and it's totally foreseeable that if I end up homeless and on the streets, that I might end up dead, because the statistics on deaths of homeless people, it's a lot higher if you're homeless. You're more likely to die than if you're in a home. So there's actually a claim there for being under a level of duress. Being, if you like, they could be attempting to murder you. It sounds dramatic, but that's what happens. People end up on the streets and they die. And that's avoidable death, because all they needed to do was say, all right, then we'll accept the £200.
Symbolic of his struggle against reality.
I've had my week upset this week because I've had the DWP suddenly hit me with, what's it called? Oh, crikey, I've got to find the letter now. It's a notification of local service compliance telephone interview, which basically means that somebody's tried to grasp me up for something that they think I've done, and now I've got to prove my innocence. So that's going to be another venture. But again, when you're in these circles, there's so many people that have already dealt with these things. You can get like a head start because they're all in different groups talking different things. I'm in groups on Facebook that deal with benefits, groups that deal with bailiff, groups that deal with banks, there's a group for everything. So there's always somebody who's got the head around something and knows how you should handle it, and that gives you a valuable head start, doesn't it? If you were just, when I was on my own, when I first started, and I didn't know anybody in any of these groups, I didn't even know them groups existed. I'd never heard of Cy Spaniard. I'd never even heard of John Harris until I found him on the net, and he seemed to be like the forerunner of all of the people getting into law and trying to understand the name and the legal fiction and the person and all of that.
Now, it has to be said on this point, Dave is quite right. It was John Harris, very much at the forefront of this. Rather than take my word for it, though, why not take John Harris's word for it? I wonder if Dave read John Harris's book, released at the time that he killed himself, called Memoirs of the Antichrist. We'll let John sum it up for himself.
And if I'd have known that was the price that I was going to pay,
Yeah, you're talking about your personal life.
yeah, there was no way that I would have ever gone for it. I would have never have entertained it for a second.
No. Well, it is very sad indeed, but my God, it opened so many people's eyes.
Yeah, but I honestly feel now that it's probably done more detriment than it has benefit. You know,
Yes.
I do, because I didn't explain things the way they should have been explained. I should have done it from, I said in the beginning it was a perspective, but I didn't actually carry that perspective out. I kind of delivered it as though it was some form of truth, and I had no right to do that whatsoever, because I couldn't prove any aspect of it. I had evidence that was on the screen, but it still wasn't 100% proof that I was right in what I was suggesting.
But it is, John.
Yeah, aspects of it are, Graham, but not all of it.
Well, the way I look through it, and I can't fault it. I can't fault it all the way through, and it's just perfect sense. And
yeah, but it created so many monsters, for fuck's sake. You know, it created free men in the lounge. It created, you know, freeloaders on the land. You know, it created people who had this miscomprehension that they could fucking do anything and get away with it because they were above the fucking law or were subject to the law. And some of these people did some pretty fucking horrible things. You know, even to the point that people died.
Okay.
That's fucking wrong, mate. That is severely wrong. And if I'm, you know, in some ways responsible for these sort of things happening, I mean, then I didn't do it. I didn't offer my fellow men a service.
No, you didn't. You can't carry that, John. You can't carry that. If the information didn't come out from you, it would have come out from somewhere else. And I'm eternally...
Maybe it would have come out, Graham, in a way that wouldn't have created the monsters it created.
Well, the monster created from performing on stage. That's the time the ego switch on. The ego has got to switch on when you're on stage. If it doesn't, it doesn't come across. And you're a great orator. And if there has to be a certain amount of ego when you're on that stage, is leaving it there when you come off. That's the hard part.
Yeah, I suppose. I mean, at one time I used to look at it and I used to say, yeah, it was my ego and it weren't my fault. And then I realised that basically humanity created this thing called the ego just to give something else the blame for its own fucking insidious actions. So I am to blame. I don't blame my ego. My ego is not a separate part of me that has some fucking form of control over my life. I have a fucking choice. And I made, over this last 5 months, some very, 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 not just disturbing choices, but actually some very ludicrous choices. But at every moment of that, I cannot blame anyone bar myself, because I had a fucking choice. I had a choice whether I got on that stage that day. And if I could go back in time, I would have never gone on that stage.
It's a god-awful small affair to the girl with the mousy hair, but her mummy is yelling no, and her daddy has told her to go, but her friend is nowhere to be seen as she walks through her sunken dream to the seat with the clearest view, and she's hooked to the silver screen. But the film is a saddening bore, 'cause she's lived it 10 times or more. She can spit in the eyes of fools as they ask her to focus on sailors fighting in the dance hall. Oh man, look at those cavemen go. It's the freakiest show. Take a look at the man beating up the wrong guy. Oh man, I wonder if he'll ever know he's in the best-selling show. Is there life on Mars? It's on America's tortured brow that Mickey Mouse has grown up a cow. Now the workers have struck for fame, 'cause Lennon's on sale again. See the mice in their million hordes, from Ibiza to the Norfolk Broads. Rule Britannia is out of bounds, to my mother, my dog and clowns. But the film is a sad thing for, 'cause I wrote it 10 times or more. It's about to be writ again, as they ask her to focus on sailors fighting in the dance hall. Oh man, look at those cavemen go. It's the freakiest show. Take a look at the lawman beating up the wrong guy. Oh man, I wonder if you'll ever know. You will have a selling show. It's their life on Mars.
I've nothing but my name.
Now, fuck off!
How shall we fuck off, oh Lord?